All right, so everyone get ready because we are going deep on this one. That execution in South Carolina, Brad Sigmon.
Oh, yeah. Definitely a lot to unpack there. Not your typical method.
No, not at all. I mean, firing squad. Like, haven't seen that since, what, 2010 was the last one in the U.S.? Wild.
It is really brings up a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Even beyond just capital punishment in general, but the HLW too.
absolutely. And you've got all this stuff here, articles, legal things. So let's try to, like, break it down. What made this case so different? And does this tell us anything about where the death penalty is going in America? Big questions.
Huge. Yeah, definitely raises a lot of questions.
Yeah.
I think you're right. It's not just about is it right or wrong, but like you said, the methods themselves and how that all plays into how people see it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Okay, so anyone who hasn't been following this super closely, can we like back up? Who was this guy and what even put him on death row to begin with?
Right. So we're talking 2001, this Sigmund guy gets convicted of double murder. Really brutal stuff.
Oh, God.
Yeah, bludgeoned his ex-girlfriend's parents to death and then kidnapped her at gunpoint. She did manage to escape, but just a horrifying crime, and that's what got on the death sentence.
Okay, so he's there on death row and then decides on the firing squad. Feels like something from way back, doesn't it?
Totally, and that's what's so interesting, right? Like, here we are, all this debate about capital punishment, but the way we're doing it is straight out of the Wild West.
Mm-hmm.
Practically, he had options, though, in South Carolina, lethal injection, the electric chair, or firing squad, and he picks the firing squad.
Right, and his lawyer put out that statement, right, all those worries about the lethal injection drugs.
Exactly, like expiration dates were they stored, right? Maybe even watered down.
Mm.
Things that could mean a really, really painful execution.
Yeah, and they said they tried to get info about the drugs from the state, but no dice. So it makes you think, was it really his choice or was he backed into a corner? Like if you don't know what you're getting with the injection.
Totally adds a whole other dimension to this, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It does, because now you wonder, are other people on death row watching this thinking maybe the firing squad's the way to go, even if it seems more brutal on the surface?
And that's what's kind of scary, right? Like, is it actually a choice if one option is all secretive and potentially you suffer more? It really highlights how messed up the system is.
Yeah, it's like a no-win no matter what you pick.
Exactly, and it shows just how flawed the whole system is. But, we can't forget this Sigmund was a person, right? Facing death and his final statement, it gives you a little window into what he was thinking, trying to come to terms with everything and wanting mercy.
Absolutely. His statement was powerful. He actually called for them to end the death penalty. He even quoted the Bible, talked about forgiveness.
Which is strange when you think about it.
Yeah.
Right? This guy who did this horrible thing, but then right before he dies, he's saying, forgive everyone. It shows you how complicated people are.
Yeah.
Good and bad all mixed up.
So was he being sincere, or was that to try and get people on his side? Who knows?
Impossible to say, and that's what makes it so interesting. His lawyers also tried to get him. Clemency said he was mentally ill when it happened, which adds another layer to it all.
Wow. So you've got this final statement, the clemency plea, and Bazenu's both get denied. The governor wouldn't step in. The Supreme Court didn't even explain why they wouldn't hear the case.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's pretty normal. With death penalty cases, all move so fast, there's not a lot of time for appeals or looking deeper into things that might change the outcome.
So he chose this knowing what it meant. What was it actually like? Those articles you sent had some pretty intense descriptions from people who were there.
Yeah, it's definitely not for the faint of heart. They said he was strapped to a chair in the execution chamber wearing a black jumpsuit. They put a hood over his head.
Could you see the firing squad?
Nope, they were hidden behind a wall. You could only see the rifles poking through these holes. They fired 3 shots all at once. And people said this little red stain showed up on his chest, and then a doctor checked him and said he was dead.
Wow. And how long did the whole thing take?
From when they shot to the doctor saying he was dead, just over 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Wow. That's quick compared to some lethal injections, which can take way longer if something goes wrong.
Right, and that's a big argument for firing squads, that it's more humane because it's over vastly less suffering. But, of course, some would say killing someone, no matter how you do it, is just wrong, period.
And that's where it gets really interesting, right? It's not just about the technical part, the execution, but the whole moral and ethical thing about capital punishment itself.
Absolutely, and I think this case, because of the firing squad, it makes you think about those questions in a much more real way. Like
Yeah.
it takes away that feeling of it being all clinical and medical, like with lethal injection, and you just see it for what it is.
Yeah.
The state killing someone.
Feels like we've gone back in time, firing squads. That's like something out of a history book, not 2023.
Yeah, right. So different from how we think about lethal injection, all like medical and stuff. But it's interesting, this shift back to the old ways. Says a lot about where the death penalty is at in America right now.
Oh, how so?
Well, one thing is states are having a really hard time getting those lethal injection drugs.
Oh, yeah, I read about that.
Drug companies don't want to be connected to executions. Plus, there's all the supply chain problems. So places like South Carolina, they're turning back to firing squads, electric chairs, things they can actually get their hands on.
So it's like a practicality thing, not some big change of heart.
Exactly. Not really about changing their minds. It's just what they can do.
That's kind of messed up, isn't it? Like, how you end someone's life comes down to what's convenient.
Yeah, it does make you think about what really matters to this system. But even besides that, this firing squad thing could actually change how people view the death penalty in general.
Really?
Think about it. In lethal injection, it's all medical, right?
I
Almost peaceful in a way. So
Yeah.
it kind of separates the idea of execution from the reality of death. But a firing squad, there's no hiding it. It's violent. It makes you deal with the fact that the state is taking a life.
So maybe it makes people realize how brutal it really is and they turn against it.
Could happen. Some people say lethal injection has made us numb to the whole thing because it seems less barbaric. But firing squads, that's a lot harder to stomach. The image of it, the sound, it sticks with you, whether you're there or just seeing it on the news.
It's like we're going back to an eye for an eye kind of justice, where the punishment has to be just as shocking as the crime.
Yeah, interesting way to think about it. Makes you wonder, what's the point of the death penalty anyway? Is it revenge? To scare people?
Mm-hmm.
Just to get dangerous people out of society? How we kill them says a lot about why we're doing it.
And those reasons, those ideas about justice and punishment, they're definitely going to be shaped by what we see, right? How it's shown on TV and the news, that kind of stuff.
100%. We're bombarded with images all the time. So
Sure.
as firing squads become more normal, the pictures, the stories, it'll change how we think about it for sure.
And remember, there were those protests, right? Outside the prison before they executed Sigmon, people saying, get rid of the death penalty altogether, think this firing squad thing could actually help that movement.
Maybe for some folks, seeing that violence might be what, makes them realize no matter how you do it, taking a life is just wrong.
But couldn't it go the other way, too? Some people see that and think, yeah, he deserved it. That's what you get for doing something that bad.
Yeah, that's the risk, right? That we get used to the violence and it becomes easier to accept taking a life as punishment.
It's like we're trying to walk this line between justice and mercy, acknowledging the harm, but also saying every life is important.
And that's a tough line to walk, especially when you think about how the death penalty affects everyone, not just the person being executed.
Right. We haven't even talked about the toll it takes on everyone involved. Can you imagine being on that firing squad, knowing you ended someone's life, even if it was legal?
It's got to be incredibly heavy.
Mm.
There's more and more research showing the psychological impact on executioners can be serious times. PTSD, nightmares, anxiety, all the signs of trauma, and they're often left to deal with it alone. No real support.
It's like we're asking them to do this awful thing, and then we just leave them hanging with all the emotional baggage.
And it's not just them, the witnesses too. Journalists, lawyers, even family members of the victim or the person being executed, they're all affected by what they see.
To be in that room and see that level of violence up close, I can't even imagine.
Right, and the people who say firing squads are more humane because they're quick, they don't think about that trauma, it doesn't just go away because it was over fast. The images, the sounds, the emotions, it all stays with you.
Makes you wonder, are we really getting justice, or are we just making more violence and trauma?
That's a good question, because if we're supposed to be building a better world,
Mm-hmm.
just more caring than is the death penalty. Any way you do it, really part of that.
And that brings us back to the big question, doesn't it? What's the point of capital punishment anyway? Is it revenge? To stop other people from doing crimes? To help the victims' families feel better? Or is it something else entirely?
Big questions, no easy answers. And I think this case with the firing squad being so in your face, it makes those questions even more important. It makes us look at what we're actually doing when we execute someone and ask ourselves, is this what we want our society to be like?
Yeah, and maybe it'll make us have a more honest conversation about the death penalty, its place in the world,
I hope so, because if we're going to talk about justice, about taking a life, then we got to be willing to really talk about it, understand how complicated it is, and see how it affects everyone involved.
Okay, so we've covered a lot here. Brad Sigmon's case, the history of firing squads, the laws, the ethics, the psychological stuff, victims' families, and how different states do things so differently. It's a lot. What are the big things people should be thinking about after hearing all this? I feel like my head's spinning, you know? We've talked about so much, the laws, the ethics, the logistics, the emotional side of it all. It's a lot.
Yeah, you're right. It really is. And you know what? I think that's kind of the point with the death penalty. It pulls you in from every angle and there's no easy answer. But maybe that's how it should be,
Mm.
you know?
You mean that feeling of being unsettled is actually a good thing? Like we're not just going along with it, but actually thinking it through?
That's what I mean. Yeah, we need that kind of thinking, especially when you see what happens with cases like the Sigmund thing. We talked about how his picking the firing squad might change things for other guys on death row.
Yeah.
But what about the bigger picture? Could this, like, change how America does the death penalty?
It's hard to say, right? I mean, on one hand, seeing a firing squad, it's so brutal, right? Could make people say, enough, let's just get rid of the whole thing.
Yeah, it's not hiding anything, right? You can't pretend it's a medical thing or that the person just goes to sleep peacefully. You're watching someone get killed, and that's really hard to stomach for a lot of people.
But then again, like we said, some people might see that and think, yeah, he had it coming. That's what happens when you do something that horrible.
Exactly. That's the thing. It could go either way. Maybe it gets more people on board with getting rid of the death penalty. Maybe states start banning it, or at least they stop doing it in these super graphic ways. Or maybe it makes the people who like the death penalty even stronger about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's what they deserve. And it just gets harsher.
Almost like we're all waiting to see what happens next. Will this be the thing that changes everything?
I think it could be. It's a powerful image,
Yeah.
you know, and images get people's attention. They tell the story, even when it's something as complicated as this.
And you know, something that really struck me was how quick the execution was. Just a couple minutes. But he was on death row for decades. What do you think about that?
But it is a weird contrast, right?
Yeah.
All that time waiting, all the lawyers and appeals, and then bam, it's over in a flash. And I think it shows you something about the death penalty itself, like a conflict at its core.
Oh, what do you mean?
Well, on the one hand, it's all about being really careful in court, right? Making sure everything's fair, the person had every chance to appeal, like really taking the time to get it right. And then on the other hand, you've got this incredibly violent thing that happens so fast, you can't take it back once it's done.
Yeah. Like those two things don't really go together, do they? Being slow and careful in court and then being so sudden and final with the execution.
Yeah, and I don't think we as a society have really figured that out. you
Right.
know. We want to say the death penalty is about justice, but killing someone, no matter how you do it, is violent and there's no going back.
And I bet that feels even weirder when you think about the different ways they execute people.
Absolutely. Well, lethal injection, it's almost like they're trying to trick you, right? Make it seem like it's all controlled and clean, but the firing squad, it's
Mhm.
real. There's no hiding what's happening. It makes you see the power of the state and what it means to take a life.
So after all this talking, all this thinking about it, where do we go from here? What should people be doing?
Well, I think the most important thing is to keep learning. You
Yeah.
know? Stay up to date on what's happening with the death penalty in America and all over the world. Read articles, books, watch documentaries. There's tons of stuff out there. And the more you know, the better you can figure out what you believe and talk to other people about it.
Yeah, and those conversations are so important, right? Not just us talking here, but everyone talking to their friends, their families, and their communities. It's not easy to talk about, but we can't just ignore it.
Exactly. Staying silent is basically saying, it's okay, we got to speak up if we care about justice and fairness and treating people with dignity.
And that means looking at what we believe too, being open to hearing different sides, because nobody's got all the answers. This is hard. There are good points on all sides. But if we come to it with an open mind, ready to listen, then maybe we can actually make the world a little better. Well, that's a good thought to end on. I think we've gone as deep as we can on this one today. We've talked about Brad Sigmon's case, all about firing squads, the laws, the ethical stuff, all the complicated emotions and how messed up it is that the death penalty is so different depending on where you are in America. It's been a tough topic, but an important one, and I hope it's giving you all something to think about. Keep asking those questions and keep those conversations going. Thanks for listening, everyone.